American people, and particularly American parents, soundly rejected the woke social experiment on November 5th. Turns out pushing gender confusion, mutilation, and delusion on children has gone too far, even for many on the left. But even with the red wave electoral victories on the map, there are still plenty of radical doctors, therapists, and so called experts out there preying on the innocence and fragility of children. Well, my next guest has taken a lot of heat from colleagues in her own field for standing up and speaking out against it. But with her help, maybe we can make therapy sane again. The truthful therapist and author of A Practical Response to Gender Distress, Tips and Tools for Families, Pamela Garfield-Jaeger, joins me now. Pamela, it's great to have you. You know, this is a real hot topic right now, and I'm actually a little bit optimistic and comforted that this topic actually kind of rose to the top during the election. You know, a lot of people think that the social issues, they play a back seat. Abortion was the big social issue, of course, in this past election, but a lot of folks, even on the left, said this trans stuff is going too far for me. And I think a lot of parents in particular maybe cast their vote reflective of that change in attitude. What are you noticing on the ground in your field? Are people starting to get it? Maybe that this has gone too far?
Yeah, for one, I'm noticing it's not just AOC that has taken down her pronouns, but a lot of my colleagues have done that also. I think it's because they have figured out that it's not so popular to have your pronouns on your bio. And a lot of people have figured out that this is a problem, but they've been scared, they've been silenced, or they have self-selected themselves to leave the profession because it goes against their morals and their values. So the fact that this is now finally coming to the surface, perhaps more people like me that think like me, that message me almost every day and say, thank you for speaking the truth, might also come forward and become part of the profession and do what's right for the children.
You know, isn't it wild that it even has to be a thing, that it has to be an electoral defeat for people in your industry who take an oath to really practice therapy and science, you know, especially on young, fragile people. It takes an election victory or an election loss in their case to be like, oh, maybe we should reel this back in a little bit. It's wild to me that that has to be the case. But, you know, there's a lot of undercurrents here that I think need to be addressed. And you're so excellent at doing that and really getting to the meat of why this has become such an epidemic and such an issue. But, you know, you've also followed the money on this. And even in your career, there's a lot of folks that do what you do, but maybe they're more motivated by the dollar signs. Also, the people in big pharma and in medicine, more motivated by the dollar signs of the trans ideology. What can you tell me about what you've learned going through this process and uncovering and bringing a lot of this stuff to light?
Well, I think this is a very top-down movement. So I think most people who believe in this, the true believers, I honestly don't believe most of them recognize that this is about the money and about the power. I think they've been bamboozled, they've been fooled to believe this is about kindness and compassion by those who do stand to make a lot of money. And so this is definitely coming from big pharma. This is coming from donors. I was just at the AEP conference, and pretty much every single pharmaceutical company was represented there. And
so what is that conference for my audience that doesn't understand the acronym or isn't familiar with it?
So the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it was a national convention in Orlando, Florida. It was huge. And there were people there internationally too, thousands of people. I was there at a table with detransitioners and other professionals and mothers just to talk about some of the harms that are happening on the ground when it comes to this gender medicine in quotes. And we were actually kicked out on the third day. And I think it's because exactly what you just said, follow the money. We were a threat to a lot of dollar signs.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, the detransition movement. I've talked to detransitioners. I know that you've spent a lot of time, as you said, talking to people that have gone through this, that maybe had gender confusion, gender dysphoria, and they decided to go the medical route. They decided to either take puberty blockers or get surgeries. And you and I have talked about this in previous discussions. They are now hooked on big pharma because for the rest of their lives, they are going to be a customer. And so when we talk about following the money for my audience that's kind of unfamiliar with the first half of the conversation that you and I have had on this. These people are customers for life, and Big Pharma has a big stake in that because they're essentially sitting ducks, right? Like you hook them young and then you have a lifelong customer. When you interact with people in Big Pharma, or you go to conferences like this and you see Big Pharma represented, or you see medicine or people that are supposedly supposed to be medical professionals and they're hostile to you, what does that tell you, or what's going on under the surface there that people outside of the industry might not understand?
Well, honestly, most of them aren't hostile to me. Most of them are just so naive. They don't realize what's going on. I think the people who really would be hostile, they don't talk to me. They stay away, and I stay away from them at this point. Um, but they don't understand what is happening to these patients, and that's why we were there, and that's why we were such a big threat. I had the patients sitting next to me talking about their personal harm, and doctors who had been naive to all of these harms sat down and were surprised and shocked. They never heard of any of this stuff. They didn't recognize that, especially boys who are put on estrogen really young or put on these puberty blockers really young, they're no longer able to produce testosterone, which creates a whole host of medical issues. And like you said, makes them hooked to Big Pharma for life, because then they can't produce testosterone as a man. And then they have other health issues. There's blood clots, there's cancer, there's all kinds of issues. The list goes on and on. So, and of course they become sterile. They're not able to have sexual function. If they're on puberty blockers, they grow up with a micro penis. These are some things that I think the layman's person, the layman's doctor just simply doesn't understand. And even these reps, I don't think they know it either. So
How
I'm not
not,
talking to
though?
the people.
I mean, I'm not a medical professional. I don't know jack about science. Don't know anything about the profession. But me, as an average person, I could deduce, just being somebody who has a functioning brain, I could be like, yeah, you take a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, and you start putting them on hormones, or you start messing with their hormones, or you start cutting off body parts, or you start intervening in their physicality before they're fully developed. I could tell you that that person's going to experience problems. How would a medical doctor not understand that that would be the ramifications of what they're doing to a child?
It's
How?
profound, actually, very profound. They don't think about it. They follow the leader. So doctors are very notorious for following authority and trusting authority. I think you and I have the temperament to question authority,
Who is
to
the
question the
authority on this?
CDC. Who is the authority? I think there are several authorities. I mean, for one, there's the government, there's the CDC, and honestly, I'm not even sure who all of these governing bodies, the American Psychological Association. I'm a social worker, so the National Association of Social Workers, the Pediatric Association, which is the conference I was at. All of these different associations, there are countless of them. They've all in lockstep. They followed the W path. I guess that's who they're following, who have been exposed as being extremely corrupt through the W path files. But of course, most layman's people are not aware of that, so
What
they
is
don't
the
know.
what is the path files that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so it's a large report. It was written by, well, it was released by Michael Schellenberger, and now actually the name of the woman, I'm blanking on her name, but it's a huge expose of what's been happening within WPATH, which is supposed to be the governing body, the experts on gender affirming care. And it has exposed just how evil and corrupt they are, that they know that they're working on severely mentally ill people. They know that they're sterilizing children that don't have no understanding of what that means for their future. They know that these are on the tapes. You can go online, Google the WPATH files, and you can find it. There are videotapes of their own Zoom meetings admitting that they know that they're causing these problems, that they know that it's all experimental, and it's all exposed right there. But of course, mainstream media will not cover that.
Right. Well, and there's also, of course, something that did get a little bit of attention, at least from my network and other conservative outlets, are unpublished results. So the big study, right, of supposed to follow people that have gone through the gender affirming care, the transitions, whatever, and it went unpublished on puberty blockers because the results after they followed these people 2 years after all of this, they were supposed to have such an amazing impact on their mental health, right? It's supposed to fix all of their mental health problems if they got this gender affirming care, they got these puberty blockers. Well, then the study didn't show that, maybe even showed the opposite of that. And so it was buried, and this is taxpayer funded. And I'm sure in your profession, the people that you talk to, you know the real mental health ramifications. Explain that to me, people that you've talked to, not just their physicality, but what about their mental health after they've transitioned at a young or vulnerable age?
I mean, just telling a child that they were born wrong will impact their mental health negatively. You're teaching children to hate themselves. You're teaching them to hate their bodies. You're teaching them to obsess over their bodies. And as children even just go through the social transition, you are impacting their mental health. You're putting them in a situation where they're no longer living in the truth and that they're depending on the world around them to also lie, to be stable. And that is setting them up for severe distress.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I've talked to, a handful, but I can't imagine the many that are out there. They're going to go through, lifelong changes and lifelong impacts to their mental health. And it's going to be a roller coaster for those people. So when we know this, and you've seen it, and I've heard it, and we've read about it, what do you make of governors like Governor Pritzker in Illinois saying, oh, we're going to boost sex changes now after Donald Trump won? Oh, you want to start going in there and you want to talk about parental rights and you want to talk about maybe tamping down on these surgeries for minors? Well, guess what? We're actually going to increase it now because Donald Trump won the election. What do you think the impacts of something like that in somebody like that who's leading an entire state, a very large state? What impacts are that going to have on children?
Well, obviously, it's going to have extremely negative impacts. I think left, right, middle, most people agree that children should grow up whole. So, of course, it's going to have negative impacts. And that story lines right up with what we were just talking about earlier, is follow the money. So Jennifer Pritzker is a huge proponent for this transgender agenda. The money is coming from Jennifer Pritzker. That is one of the biggest names you could find. So I think it makes sense. I believe they're cousins. Why this governor is pushing this so hard, I don't think that he thinks that this is just, to help the children feel more whole or feel more their authentic selves. This is about power and money.
Yeah. No,
It's evil.
It is evil. And there's a lot of parents out there that it's just too far for them, right? Like it's just, they're like, hey, be what you want to be. Personal story. This weekend, I was out at lunch. We saw a young girl who was dressed as a cat. She had a tail and she had ears. And you know what? My husband was like, oh, like, that's a little weird. I'm like, listen, if she wants to wear a freaking tail, let her wear a tail. Like, let her go through the phases, right? And you as a mental professional, you might be able to counsel somebody that thinks they're a cat, but in my opinion, somebody who thinks they're a cat, they might go through that. It might be a phase. They're not going to alter their body. They're not going to get claws, right? They're not going to, surgically put a tail on themselves. Like if you want to wear a tail and you're going through a phase, whatever, like be whatever. But it's when it goes to that next level of where it's life altering, life changing, and in many cases irreversible that I think a lot of parents are like, this is just way too far for me. When you look at this notion of gender affirming care, that's been the hot topic. Gender affirming care. That's the first thing you got to do. If someone questions their gender, you have to affirm it. Do you see any type of evolution of that now that maybe people are returning to some form of sanity after this Trump victory?
Well, there's a huge divide within my profession. And what's actually really great about this whole Trump victory is more conservatives or even people just are against this agenda are speaking up more because there's been so much fear. So now there's this clash, which I think is good in a way because the dissenting voices have been silenced for so long. And now we're no longer afraid to speak up. And so I'm seeing a big shift within the profession. And it's going to take a bit because it's really embedded within our profession. All of the grad schools, all of the training programs, all of the laws in several states are still pushing for what they call is conversion therapy laws. So a therapist who just simply wants to question even a cat's identity just to find out what is going on. Maybe it's related to a fetish. Maybe there's an online sexual groomer that has gotten the hold of this child and you want to explore that. That could be called conversion therapy under their laws. And we have a lot of work to do to undo what has happened in the last 4 years since they've really just put this off onto the surface.
So I know that you've written literally a manual on this, but what do you tell parents out there? Parents out there that their kid is going through something like this. They've heard these words, trans, if you're a boy, you think you're a girl, you think you're a boy, you're confused, you're non-binary, you're going through a phase, a young person, and parents are looking at this and they want to be compassionate and they don't want to be mean-spirited to, the child in their life. But they also want to make sure that that this young person, that their child or whoever they are guiding through life, they want to make sure that they're mentally stable and that they're not questioning their gender out of some bigger, deeper mental health issue. What would you tell those parents on how to approach this very delicate situation?
Yeah, it is really challenging because usually if you go head on and you just sort of try to knock the truth into your child, it's usually going to backfire.
Okay.
So what you really need to do first, the biggest, most important thing is to remove them from the influences. So the internet, the peer groups, perhaps you have to move locations. Usually you might have to take them out of school. So these are the things you're going to have to do. It seems really drastic, but these are the things that a lot of families have done to pull their kids out of what really is cult-like thinking. And then that's just the first step. And then really what you have to do is look inside yourself as a parent and look at your family, look at your dynamics, because oftentimes this happens when the family is struggling with something. It's not because they're bad parents, but this happens to families that have a vulnerability. Perhaps someone in the family has cancer or another sibling with special needs. So the other child comes up with this trans identity. Perhaps it's just for attention or perhaps it's deeper, but they land in that. And of course, the entire culture is cheering it on. It's like school teachers and doctors and counselors all saying, here you go, here's your crack, right? So it's a little bit of a different circumstance. And then my biggest advice that I always say about this, trans, and then in general, is to always question the experts and not just outsource what you want to do with your child to a counselor. You should always stay involved. In fact, I even warn even using counselors, and if you do, make sure they're vetted very heavily and you trust them and you are very involved the entire time.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the problem is parents have lost their control over what their children are being taught. Kids spend more time in school than they do at home. And that's terrifying if you've got somebody who's actively trying to take hold. A couple more things I want to talk about before I let you go. And we've talked about this before, but for my audience that's just watching this discussion for the first time, I want to talk about a couple of areas and what you've noticed historically or patterns. For those who either as children or as adults, they take on this trans identity or they have a gender dysphoria. How many of those individuals that you've personally worked with have suffered from a childhood trauma that includes sexual abuse? Have you found that that is a pattern in people that have gender dysphoria or a trans identity or something, of that in that genre?
Yeah, I'd say about 98% of them. Yes.
So why do you think that is? Because as a professional, I'm really curious to know what links that you see between someone who experienced sexual trauma or abuse as a child and the trans identity later in life.
Yeah, there's several links to this. One of the main things is when you experience trauma, one of the coping mechanisms is to dissociate from your body. And that's easy to lead someone down the path to believe that they're born in the wrong body. And they start to hate their body, especially the sexual parts that cause them pain, or it didn't really cause them pain, but they believe that that was the link to the pain. One prominent detransitioner even posted an artwork where the sexual, like her breasts were missing, and she said, just take them because she had gone through sexual trauma. You want to get rid of those parts. And this happens to men too. Men who have been sexually assaulted, they become ashamed of their penis and they want to get rid of it and they don't they don't want it. They're scared of it. So it makes a lot of sense that people with trauma would gravitate towards believing that they're born in the wrong body and believing that this will fix all of their pain.
And there's an industry that's actively preying on these people for money. You and I have talked about this before as well, but what role does certain intellectual disabilities or autism, I've talked about this, that people that are, autistic or on the spectrum, they become easy prey for what I call the rainbow mafia. You have some kind of an intellectual disability or a learning disability or some kind of something on that spectrum. How much does that impact people gravitating towards a trans lifestyle or something, again, in that genre?
Oh, it's tremendous. And they're actually marketed to. They don't even shy away from it. They have that autistic flag that has the symbol of autism on it. And they have all kinds of social media pages directed towards autistic kids. And it makes sense because autistic kids are the ones that don't fit in. They're the ones that struggle socially. And they're told, oh, you become this authentic self. They're given kind of a script. They're given what they call a mask to be able to relate to others. They didn't know how to relate to others, but now they have a new vocabulary, a new way to act. And then they have this kind of shield so that when they maybe do mess up a little bit socially because it's difficult for them, now they have this shield and people no longer can say, well, I make them feel bad because now they're trans. They have this whole protection.
Yeah. They have a protection. They also have a sense of belonging. Again, preying on vulnerable people who would rather say they're trans than say that they're autistic and get the actual help that they need to deal with their actual disability or challenge, which is autism. But they're being pushed in a direction where they're actively being preyed upon by big pharma, by science, by medicine, by mental health care experts who are not like you but have been motivated by other things, or maybe they, in their mind, they think they're doing something great. It's just really sad to me. The last question I have for you, though, is to end it on a positive note. Do you think that we're trending in the right direction in your industry and in others? Do you think that there's going to be an enlightenment maybe over the next 4 years where people like yourself are going to actually be able to provide true care to people, and you're going to be vocal about it, and it's going to be accepted?
Oh, yes, I do. I feel like right now, this last week since the election has been huge. In fact, I've met several new therapists, or they're not new, but new to me, people that have been in hiding who have come out because of this win in the election, and we're all finding each other. We're building new coalitions. There is a website called conservativecounselors.com, and it's growing now every day. And there are more and more people who are joining this fight that are recognizing that our field has been completely captured and that this is important to fight. So, and there's just so many different groups that have been forming over the last few years that now we finally have the administration and the political backing to be able to make some real changes. So I feel very hopeful.
And big props to you for being one of the people who was willing to stand up when it wasn't popular, when it wasn't acceptable. You stuck your neck out, being the truthful therapist, of course, on social media, when, you were absolutely obliterated for it. And now other people are following in your example. And sometimes it takes just one person like yourself to provide that inspiration and give people, a voice. And you've been able to do that. And you've amassed a huge following because of it. I always appreciate your guidance. I always appreciate your honesty, your truthfulness, of course. And you have a book where people can read and get tools, tips, and guidelines. I have it up right there on the screen. Gender distress. I mean, listen, for those parents out there that don't know how to navigate all this stuff and they want to do it in a compassionate way, I would highly recommend that they take your guidance. Thank you so much for your time as always and for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon. God bless you, and best of luck to your industry. They could take several cues from you, of course. Thanks so much, Pamela. All right, folks, that does it for this very special episode of Tomi Lahren is Fearless. You can catch me right back here, of course, Monday, 1 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Thursday, live 1 p.m. Eastern, of course, Fridays as well. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless, and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.